Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to tie Pat Dorsey's Top Secret Midge. This is one of my favorite midge imitations for the winter months. I find it is subtle enough not to deter those trout, but it has just enough flash to convince them to eat the fly. So, truly a great pattern from them. Um, yeah, let's get into it. For the hook today, I am using a Tiemco 2488H in a size 20. Now, the 2488H is the heavy wire alternative to the Tiemco 2488. The original pattern called for a 2488. It doesn't really matter. I'm just using the heavy wire alternative. For thread, I'm using some A-Dot uni thread in dark brown. So, yeah. Starting off, we can attach the thread right behind the eye. And the first material we're going to use here is a little bit of 6/0 white uni thread. And this is going to be our rib for the fly. So it's very important for this to make sure that to not handle the thread too much, because the thread will start to fray and it will get an uneven rib from that. So be careful not to overhandle it. And to tie this in, we're just going to overextend it past the eye, and then we're going to take a loose wrap around it. And then, let me get that so you guys can see it. We are going to pull the excess through those wraps until we get the proper amount. Now, we are going to start wrapping to the bend, and a few color variations for this fly are you can tie it in purple. I know that's another commercially tied color. You can also tie it in black or olive, but the interesting thing that I find is that there aren't a whole lot of brown midge imitations on the market, so I think it's important to set yourself aside from the crowd and fish something different, especially because most people just fish black midge imitations, and black works, it always works, but I think it's nice to throw some brown in there as well. So once we get down to the bend with our thread, we can start going back up to the eye and trying to keep that body nice and smooth and symmetrical. You can see I have some white from that thread showing still, so trying to cover up anything that we missed on the way down. Trying to keep it nice and smooth, because the way we create pretty overbodies with that rib is from making nice underbodies, because everything matters, and if it's not smooth, your rib will not want to lay down correctly. So, like I said, don't overhandle the thread. Take your time, avoid that hook point, and start making those even wraps. I find with thread ribs, they're almost even more difficult to make even, because if you lose tension on it for a second, it'll start unraveling and they'll move around, and then you get this big uneven area. So take your time and keep even tension. We're going to go all the way up to the hook eye here. And yeah, and the way I like to tie this off is I like to spiral my thread around my rib, in this case my white thread, and that basically, if we take a wrap with this, it'll lock it down. So I like to go on top of the hook shank, you can see there, take a single wrap, and that locks it down. Then you can take a second one so that doesn't come undone, and that's a very nice way to get a clean tie off on these ribs on these small flies. I left a little bit more than I should have there, so you can always just smooth that out with your fingernail. But yeah, that's a nice way to tie off your ribs on these flies. So the next material we're going to use is a little bit of Glamour Madura. Now, this stuff is an embroidery thread. It was first used on this pattern, I believe. Pat Dorsey kind of brought it into the fly tying industry. Super nice material. It's going to imitate the wing puff on this fly. So the way we want to tie this in is we want to overextend it past the eye and then take a loose wrap, and we can just pull that material through that wrap until we have just the right amount, and we can securely tie that down. And make sure you have a smooth thorax for this area, because it's kind of a landing zone for the next step, and if you have any wild fibers, it's going to probably end up going over the eye, making it hard to tie onto your tippet. So be sure to make it all clean before we use our third material, which is going to be a little bit of rusty brown superfine dubbing. And the trick with this stuff is we're trying to make a football shaped thorax. We're not using very much, as you can see. You don't want to use too much of it right away. just take your time because you can't really get this stuff off your thread very easily. So just add a little bit. I usually end up applying 2 batches of it onto my thread. You really want to get a really smooth dubbing noodle for this fly because if there are any stragglers, it'll really kind of stick out on these smaller patterns. So make sure you get that nice and neat. And to make sure you don't crowd the eye on this fly, you kind of want to make a wedge going from, the point end going towards the eye. So the thickest part should be towards the eye. And if you do that, you're going to have basically this cliff, and there'll be this nice taper, but then you won't be crowding the eye. So here, I'll show you what I'm doing here. So as you can see, I'm creating a taper towards the eye, but then I'm not necessarily going onto the eye. I'm creating a nice ledge, and that gives me a nice area to tie off my thread. So the last step is to grab your whip finisher and whip finish the fly. And the last thing actually is to, after we whip finish, is to trim that glamour Madura. We haven't done that yet. And my general rule for trimming this stuff is I like to fold it over the thorax and take an angled cut, like so. And that usually gives me about the wing size I want. Usually works out. Just rub your finger through it so it flares up, so you uncord it a little bit. And yeah, that is your finished Top Secret Midge. Great little pattern. I like to fish it on my nymphing rigs, usually below a strike indicator on my second or third fly position, or if they're rising trout, I will fish it as an emerger to rising trout. So super versatile. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Yeah, have a good time on the water and tight lines. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.